In part 3, we are going to talk about layers. Remember that that is the first element in the grammar of graphics, so we're going to go through each of those in a little more detail, each in turn, and we're going to look at some scripting that takes advantage of these elements. Graphs are constructed through layering plot elements on top of each other. Layers can be thought of as the modular parts of a more complex graph. There are various types of layers, including data, geometries, statistics, scales, coordinate systems, facets, themes, and labels. You should recognize these as elements in the grammar of graphics. ggplot, which stands for Grammar of Graphics Plot, is the first layer. Arguments in ggplot are global unless overridden. So because we typically stick with the same set of data for the entire plot, the ggplot usually includes the data layer, which must be a data frame. Now in the tidyverse, of course, we use tibbles, but you may recall that a tibble is simply a special type of data frame. So you don't have to use a tibble. You could use another data frame. You could work with a mindset that is not in the tidyverse and still use ggplot. Or you can use a tibble, which is what we'll do most of the time since we're going to be working in the tidyverse. Aesthetics are typically included in the first layer. Remember that we can override aesthetic if we need to in any subsequent layer. A layer ends with plus when more layers will be added. I think I showed you in my introduction that if you forget to do this and put it on the next line, the tidyverse is smart enough to say, did you remember to put plus at the end of your layer statement? So let's go ahead and get started with the ggplot2 package. If I load the tidyverse and have that installed, that will include the loading of ggplot2, so I'm in good shape. Now the tidyverse, just like base R, actually includes some data sets, and that's done so that people like me have data available for teaching. And also when Hadley Wickham writes his books, he uses those data sets in his books. And so when I use the data sets and I use his books, I can kind of coordinate the two things. So we're going to go ahead sometimes, in fact often, while we're walking through the tidyverse and use the data that he's provided for us. So the first data set that we're going to use is called MPG. Notice I'm using question mark MPG in order to provide us some information about that data set. This data set contains a subset of fuel economy data that the EPA makes available on fueleconomy.gov. It contains only models which had a new release every year between 1999 and 2008. So one decade, basically the first decade of 2000. This was used as a proxy for the popularity of the car. Okay, so basically using new cars by only using cars that had a new model every year between 1999 and 2008. So we have a data frame, which is good because we need a data frame in order to be able to do this in ggplot2. A data frame, it has 234 rows, so you know that that is 234 models of cars, and it has 11 variables: manufacturer name, model name, engine displacement, which basically is like the size of the engine, or related to the size, how much power it ends up having, and so forth. Okay, let's go ahead and look about the characteristics also of MPG by just going ahead and typing MPG, which in the tidyverse means that we're going to get a tibble. So here's the start of our tibble, the first 10 lines. Looks like the manufacturer is Audi, the model's A4. Here we have the displacement of the engine, and notice there's different values of the displacement. We notice the year that model was produced, the cylinder, and so forth. And if we don't know, if we don't remember, for instance, what trans means, and it means manual or automatic transmission, we can always come back down here to this help window and we can get information. Okay? If you were ever to release a data set that you wanted folk to use, like for me as a professor, releasing data sets that I want my students to use, it's always a good idea to have this information. Those of you who had me for EDRM 710 and 711 know that I always provided this sort of information when I released a data set, telling you what every variable was and what exactly it means. Okay, so a graph consists of layers, and the first layer is going to be our data layer, which we usually put in the ggplot function. So every plot needs data, and so we typically use the data for every layer. That means we make it global by putting it in ggplot. So let's see what happens when I put this command in, and let's see what happens in terms of our plot. Very exciting. We get this almost white. You can see it's got a white border, but it's pretty much, it's like a little light gray with a pure white border around it. This is our data layer. Well, you might look at it and say, why are we not seeing any data yet? That's for two reasons. One, we've not chosen an aesthetic, and then we haven't chosen what kind of geome we're going to use. So we need to do that. And let's do that in our next video.